Marco Bellini slammed both tattooed hands onto the polished oak table so hard that crystal glasses jumped into the air. "Who betrayed me?" he roared. Silence. The men seated around him refused to look him in the eyes. Some stared at the floor. Others pretended to study the maps spread across the table. Nobody breathed. Marco slowly rose from his chair. Every inch of his muscular body was covered in black and grey Italian tattoos, from his neck to his wrists. Roses, saints, Roman warriors, skulls, and wolves disappeared beneath the sleeves of his tailored black suit. Even his fingers carried ink that reminded everyone in the room exactly who he was. The Bellini family didn't forgive betrayal. They erased it. Marco walked around the table. His polished shoes echoed through the mansion's underground meeting room. 1, 2, 3, 3. He stopped behind one of his captains. "Look at me." The captain's lips trembled. I don't know anything, boss." Marco leaned closer. "You just lied." Before anyone could react, Marco pulled a pistol from behind his back and fired into the ceiling. Bang! Dust rained onto the table. Several men flinched. One nearly fell off his chair. Marco smiled. "There," he pointed. "Only guilty men jump." The captain began sweating uncontrollably. "I swear on my mother, boss, I never betrayed you." Marco stared at him for several seconds before placing the gun back inside his jacket. "Then, pray, you're telling me the truth." His voice was calm again. That frightened everyone even more, because Marco Bellini was never more dangerous than when he lowered his voice. For 25 years, he had ruled one of Italy's most feared criminal empires. Politicians feared him. Rival families avoided him. Even corrupt police officers thought twice before saying his name out loud. He had survived wars. He had survived prison. He had survived countless assassination attempts. But this time, someone had come dangerously close, someone from inside, and Marco intended to find out who. If he had to destroy every relationship he had ever built, so be it. The heavy meeting room door suddenly opened. A young guard rushed inside. "Boss!" Marco didn't even turn around. "You interrupted me. I'm sorry, but your convoy is ready." Marco nodded once. The meeting was over. For now, the captain stood immediately. Nobody dared leave before Marco. As they followed him upstairs through the luxurious Bellini mansion, overlooking the Italian coastline, nervous glances passed between them. Nobody trusted anybody anymore. Outside, 6 armored SUVs waited. Bodyguards surrounded the vehicles with military precision. Marco climbed into the middle SUV. Beside him sat his lifelong consigliere, Matteo Ricci. Matteo frowned. "You don't like today?" Marco smirked. "You never like any day. This feels different." Marco looked out the window. "You think I'm being hunted. I know you are." Marco didn't answer. Instead, he adjusted the cuff of his suit, revealing another tattoo wrapping around his wrist. A Latin phrase. Fortis fortuna adiuvat. Fortune favors the brave. The convoy rolled through the winding roads toward Naples. For nearly 20 minutes, everything seemed peaceful. Then, a truck exploded through an intersection. "Boss!" the driver shouted. Boom! The lead SUV flipped violently into the air. Machine gun fire erupted from both sides of the road. Glass shattered. Bullets ripped through the convoy. "Ambush!" someone screamed over the radio. Marco grabbed his pistol instantly. "Drive, we're trapped!" More explosions. The second SUV burst into flames. Bodyguards returned fire from the windows. Marco kicked open his door before the vehicle stopped moving. He rolled across the pavement as bullets struck the asphalt around him. 2 masked gunmen charged toward him. Marco fired twice. Both attackers collapsed. "Matteo!" he shouted. "I'm here!" Another explosion threw everyone to the ground. Smoke swallowed the road. Marco's ears rang. His vision blurred. Then, a sniper's bullet tore through the air. It struck Marco squarely in the shoulder. He staggered backward. Before he could recover, Another blast exploded beneath a nearby vehicle. Metal fragments flew everywhere. One piece slammed into Marco's head. Everything went black. 3 days later, every television station in Italy carried the same breaking news. The feared businessman Marco Bellini remains in critical condition following last week's violent attack. Doctors confirm severe neurological injuries. Sources say Bellini has permanently lost his eyesight. He is also believed to be paralyzed from the waist down. Across Italy, celebrations quietly began. Rival crime families toasted expensive wine. Corrupt businessmen smiled. Politicians whispered. Inside the Bellini organization, loyalty started dying. One captain secretly emptied hidden bank accounts. Another disappeared with millions in cash. A third began contacting rival families. Everyone believed the same thing. Marco Bellini would never walk again. He would never see another sunrise. His empire was finished. Inside the Bellini mansion, silence filled the enormous bedroom. Marco sat motionless in a wheelchair. Dark glasses covered his eyes. His arms rested lifelessly on the chair. Machines beeped softly beside him. The bedroom door opened. A nurse entered quietly. "Signore Bellini, it's time for your medication." Marco never moved, never spoke, never reacted. The nurse placed the pills beside him. When she left, the bedroom became silent again. 30 seconds passed. Then Marco slowly opened one eye. He listened carefully. No footsteps, no voices, no cameras facing him. Without making a sound, his fingers curled, his arms moved, then his legs. A moment later, Italy's most feared mafia boss quietly stood up from the wheelchair. He removed the dark glasses. His eyesight was perfect. He walked toward the massive window overlooking the sea. A cold smile spread across his face. "They've already started stealing," he whispered. Behind him, another man stepped out from a hidden doorway. It was Matteo, alive, uninjured. "They believe every word," Matteo said. Marco nodded. "Good. They're circling like vultures." Marco looked toward the horizon. "Let them." Matteo folded his arms. "How long do we keep this act going?" Marco's expression hardened. "As long as it takes. I'll expose every traitor. I'll strip them of everything. And when they're all standing in the same room," he smiled, "they'll wish I had actually died." If you're already hooked by Marco's dangerous game, take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. Stories like this take a lot of work to create, and your support helps bring more cinematic stories to life. The following morning, the mansion felt different. Not because of Marco, because of everyone else. The servants whispered. The guards avoided eye contact. The lawyers arrived unusually early. And for the first time in over 2 decades, people walked through Marco Bellini's home as if the lion had already stopped breathing. None of them realized the lion was wide awake, and he was watching every single move. The first person to arrive that morning wasn't a lawyer, it wasn't a captain, it wasn't even a member of the Bellini family. It was a woman carrying a basket of freshly folded towels. Her name was Sofia Romano. She was born in a quiet town outside Florence and had worked inside the Bellini mansion for nearly 6 years. Most people barely noticed her. The other servants often whispered behind her back, calling her lazy simply because of her size, even though she always finished her work before anyone else. Sofia was proudly Italian, with warm brown eyes, dark curly hair usually tied into a loose bun, and a very large, soft, plus-size figure. She was undeniably chubby, and although people judged her appearance, those who truly knew her understood she had the biggest heart in the mansion. She knocked gently. "Signor Bellini, may I come in?" Marco immediately relaxed his muscles and let his head fall slightly. "Come in," Matteo answered from across the room, pretending to organize medication. Sofia entered quietly. She looked at Marco and her eyes filled with sadness. So it's true. Matteo sighed heavily. The doctors say he'll never see again. And he looked at the wheelchair. He'll never walk. Sofia lowered her head. Madonna, she slowly approached Marco. Signor Bellini, her voice became softer. I'm Sofia. I know you probably can't recognize my voice. I clean the West Wing. Marco remained perfectly still. Inside, he remembered her face immediately. The quiet maid, always smiling, always working. He had barely spoken 10 words to her in 6 years. Sofia placed the towels on a nearby chair. I'm going to straighten your room. If I make too much noise, forgive me. She began cleaning. Unlike the other servants, she didn't rush. She didn't complain. She didn't constantly glance at Marco with pity. Instead, she talked naturally. The sea looks beautiful today. I know you can't see it, but I thought maybe hearing about it would help. Marco almost reacted. Almost. She opened the curtains. The waves are calm. There are fishing boats already leaving the harbor. I always think mornings like this feel peaceful. She smiled to herself. I hope one day you can enjoy them again. Matteo watched quietly. After Sofia left, he looked at Marco. Interesting. Marco said nothing. Matteo chuckled. You almost smiled. Marco shot him a warning look. I don't smile. You almost did. Marco ignored him. An hour later, voices echoed downstairs. Marco recognized them instantly. His nephew, Lorenzo Bellini, 29 years old. Expensive suits, expensive watches, an even more expensive ego. Lorenzo entered the office beside Marco's bedroom without bothering to knock. So, he laughed. The old lion finally lost his claws. One of the lawyers cleared his throat. Signore Lorenzo, show some respect. Lorenzo scoffed. Respect? For a blind man? He can't even hear me. Marco clenched his fists beneath the blanket. Matteo quickly placed a hand on Marco's shoulder. Not yet. Lorenzo poured himself a glass of whiskey. We should discuss succession. The lawyer frowned. Your uncle is still alive for now. Marco's heartbeat slowed. He forced himself to remain motionless. Lorenzo continued. The businesses need leadership. I'll take over immediately. We can't let outsiders think we're weak. The lawyer hesitated. That decision belongs to Signor Bellini. Lorenzo laughed louder. Does it? He can't sign documents. He can't even see them. Marco listened carefully. Every word, every lie, every ounce of greed. When Lorenzo finally left, Marco whispered through gritted teeth, I'm going to bury him. Matteo folded his arms. You promised. Marco closed his eyes. I know. No revenge until every snake leaves its hole. That afternoon brought another visitor. Isabella, Marco's glamorous girlfriend. She entered wearing designer sunglasses, worth more than some people earned in a year. She didn't even kiss his forehead. Instead, she sat across from him. I never imagined this would happen. Silence. She looked toward Matteo. Will he understand what I'm saying? He can hear. She forced a dramatic sigh. I've been thinking. Marco already knew what was coming. This relationship, it's become impossible. She stood. I'm too young to spend my life taking care of someone. I'm sorry. She removed the diamond ring Marco had given her. It landed on the bedside table with a tiny metallic click. I deserve happiness too. She walked away, never looking back. The bedroom door closed. 5 long seconds passed. Marco whispered. She kept the necklace. Matteo blinked. What? The ring is here. But she kept the necklace. Matteo couldn't help laughing. You're noticing jewelry. Marco's jaw tightened. I paid 200,000 euros for that necklace, and she couldn't even return it. For the first time in days, they both laughed. It didn't last long. By evening, another betrayal surfaced. Matteo entered carrying a tablet. You should see this. Marco stood from the wheelchair after confirming they were alone. On the screen, security footage. One of the senior accountants was loading boxes into his car. Marco zoomed in. Cash. Stacks and stacks of cash. How much? Matteo answered quietly. Almost 8 million euros. Marco stared without speaking. Another video appeared. A warehouse manager, stealing luxury cars. Another, a captain secretly meeting with a rival family. Another, a trusted attorney copying confidential documents. Every hour, someone else betrayed him. Marco walked toward the hidden surveillance room behind his bedroom wall. More than 100 camera feeds covered every hallway, office, garage, and vault inside the estate. He watched people he had trusted for decades rob him without hesitation. I built their lives. No answer. I buried their enemies. Silence. I paid for their children's schools. His voice cracked ever so slightly. And this, he pointed at the screens, this is how they repay me. Matteo looked at his oldest friend, not as a mafia boss, but as a man. They never loved you. They feared you. Marco slowly lowered himself into a chair. And fear. He stared at the screens. Never survives weakness. A soft knock interrupted them. 3 taps. Marco immediately returned to the wheelchair, dark glasses back on. Blank expression. Come in. It was Sofia again, this time carrying a tray. Fresh pasta, soup, warm bread. I thought, she smiled nervously. The hospital food must be terrible. So I made dinner. Matteo looked surprised. You cook this? She nodded. My grandmother's recipes. I hope that's all right. Matteo accepted the tray. You didn't have to. I know. She looked at Marco. But nobody should eat alone. She carefully sat beside him. Signor Bellini, I know you can't answer, but I want you to know something. You scared me for years. She laughed softly. I thought if I dusted the wrong shelf, I'd disappear. But seeing you like this, her eyes watered. I realized you're just a person, and people deserve kindness. Marco felt something unfamiliar. Shame. She gently adjusted the blanket covering his legs. If you ever recover, I hope life gives you a second chance. Then she quietly left. The room fell silent again. Marco didn't move for nearly a minute. Finally, he spoke. She made the pasta herself. Matteo nodded. Yes. Nobody told her to. No. Marco looked toward the closed door. For 6 years, I never even knew her name. Matteo smiled. You know it now. Marco whispered it almost to himself. Sofia Romano. Outside the bedroom, Sofia walked back toward the servants' quarters. She had no idea that the man she believed couldn't see had watched every expression on her face. She had no idea he had heard every sincere word. And she certainly had no idea that, while everyone else was proving how quickly loyalty could disappear, she had just become the only person in the mansion who expected nothing in return. If this story is pulling you in, now's the perfect time to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling us whether you think Marco should ever forgive the people who betrayed him. Your support helps us bring you more emotional mafia stories every week. As night fell over the Bellini mansion, Marco thought the worst betrayals were already behind him. He was wrong. Before sunrise, he was about to discover that the conspiracy against him reached far deeper than stolen money, and that Sofia herself was about to become a target without even realizing it. Marco stood silently inside the hidden surveillance room as midnight settled over the Bellini mansion. One by one, the camera feeds flickered across the wall. The garage, the wine cellar, the private offices, the library, the family chapel, nothing unusual. Then one screen caught his attention. Lorenzo. He wasn't alone. Marco leaned closer. Turn up the audio. Matteo adjusted the controls. Lorenzo laughed as he poured expensive whiskey into 2 crystal glasses. Across from him sat Carlo Ventresca, one of Marco's oldest captains. Marco had trusted Carlo for nearly 20 years. He had stood beside him through wars, or so Marco believed. Carlo raised his glass. To the future, Lorenzo smirked. To my future. They clinked glasses. Marco's expression hardened. Lorenzo leaned forward. When the old man dies, Carlo interrupted. He won't die. He'll just exist, Lorenzo laughed. A blind man in a wheelchair is already dead. The two men burst into laughter. Matteo looked toward Marco. He expected rage. Instead, Marco smiled. A cold, dangerous smile. They're getting comfortable. Matteo nodded. Very. Marco folded his tattooed arms. Comfortable people make mistakes. Meanwhile, Sofia finished cleaning the upstairs hallway. Another maid rolled her eyes. There she goes. What? Pretending she's some saint. Sofa sighed. I'm just doing my job. The woman laughed. No, you're wasting your time. He's finished. He can't even thank you. Another servant joined in. If I were you, I'd already be looking for another employer. Sofia looked at both of them. I don't help people because they can reward me. I help people because it's the right thing. The servants exchanged amused looks. Suit yourself. As they walked away, Sofia quietly returned to work. She didn't realize Marco had watched the entire conversation from a hidden camera. Matteo smiled. She surprised you again. Marco nodded slowly. She doesn't know anyone was watching. That's what makes it real. The next morning, Lorenzo arrived carrying flowers. Marco immediately suspected something. Lorenzo had never brought flowers to anyone, ever. He entered the bedroom wearing a fake smile. Uncle. No response. I've been thinking about you. Marco almost laughed. Lorenzo placed the flowers on the table. I've decided to take over the business. It's what you would have wanted. Silence. I'm only doing this to protect the family. He leaned closer to Marco's ear. His voice became icy. You should have died on that road. Marco's jaw tightened beneath the blanket. You made everything difficult. But don't worry. I'll finish what someone else started. Lorenzo straightened his tie before leaving the room. The door closed. Marco slowly whispered, He just confessed. Matteo nodded. He certainly did, but confession isn't proof. Marco looked toward the hidden cameras. It will be. Later that afternoon, Sofia entered carrying fresh coffee. She stopped when she noticed Marco's untouched lunch. Oh no, she looked toward Matteo. He hasn't eaten? Matteo shrugged. He refuses. Sofia walked closer. She sat beside the wheelchair. Signor Bellini, I know you can't answer, but being angry won't help you heal. She picked up the spoon. Please, just one bite. Marco remained still. She smiled gently. I know, I sound ridiculous, but my mother always said, even broken hearts need food. She laughed softly. So I'm going to keep trying. She carefully held the spoon near his mouth. Marco hesitated. Then he opened his mouth, very slightly. Sophia's face lit up. There, I knew you could do it. See, one bite becomes two. She continued feeding him until the bowl was empty. When she finished, she clapped quietly. I'm proud of you. After she left, Matteo couldn't stop grinning. You've executed politicians. You've survived gang wars. But today, he laughed, a maid convinced you to eat soup. Marco rolled his eyes. Don't get used to it. That evening, another betrayal unfolded. The mansion accountant entered Marco's office believing he was alone. He opened a hidden safe, removed several stacks of cash, placed them into a briefcase. Marco watched every second through the cameras. Then, the accountant answered his phone. Yes, I've got another 2 million. Pause. No, he doesn't know. Another pause. The blind fool can't even see who's stealing from him. Marco quietly turned away from the monitor. Not because he was angry, because disappointment hurt more than anger. Matteo noticed, You're taking this personally. Marco looked at him. I attended his daughter's wedding. I carried his son after he was born. I paid for his wife's cancer treatment, and he just called me. He paused. A blind fool. Matteo had no words. For the first time in decades, the most feared mafia boss in Italy looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally. The next morning brought unexpected trouble. Sofia arrived earlier than usual. As she pushed her cleaning cart through the west hallway, she heard voices coming from Marco's private office. The door wasn't fully closed. She froze. Inside, Lorenzo was speaking with Carlo. "I've hired professionals." Carlo frowned. "So soon?" "We can't wait. What if Marco suddenly improves?" Carlo shook his head. "The doctors said." "I don't care what they said." Lorenzo interrupted. "I want certainty. When they enter this mansion, they're to suffocate him in his sleep. No bullets, no noise. It must look natural." Sofia's eyes widened. Her breathing stopped. She accidentally bumped the cleaning cart. Clang! The bucket fell over. Inside the office, silence. Lorenzo looked toward the doorway. "Did you hear that?" Carlo stood immediately. "I'll check." Sofia's heart pounded. She grabbed the bucket and hurried around the corner just before Carlo opened the office door. He looked left, then right. Nothing, only a wet floor. Carlo frowned. "Probably one of the maids." Lorenzo's voice came from inside. "Then find out which one." Sofia didn't stop walking until she reached the laundry room. She closed the door. Her hands shook uncontrollably. "Oh, God, they're going to kill him." She leaned against the wall, trying to think. Nobody would believe her. She was just a maid, but she couldn't stay silent. That afternoon, she knocked on Matteo's office. "May I come in?" Matteo smiled politely. "Of course." Sofia stepped inside. She looked nervous. I need to tell you something." "What is it?" She lowered her voice. "I heard Signor Lorenzo talking." Matteo pretended to look confused. "Talking about what?" "They're planning something. They're planning to hurt Signor Bellini." Matteo carefully studied her face. She truly believed she was risking everything. "Are you certain?" "I heard them. They want him dead." Matteo sighed. "Sofia, these are serious accusations." "I know. I wouldn't lie. Please, you have to protect him." Matteo nodded slowly. "I'll look into it." She grabbed his arm. "No, you don't understand." They sounded serious. They could come any day. They could come tonight. When she finally left, Matteo immediately entered Marco's hidden room. "She knows." Marco looked up. "Everything? Not about us, but she overheard Lorenzo." Marco remained silent. Matteo smiled faintly. "She came straight to warn us. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for protection. She just wanted to save your life." Marco stared at the surveillance monitor showing Sofia quietly crying, alone in the laundry room. "I've spent half my life trying to buy loyalty." His voice was barely above a whisper. "And the only loyal person works for minimum wage." If Sofia's loyalty is impressing you, now is the perfect moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below. Would you have risked your own life to warn Marco, or would you have stayed silent? We read your comments, and your support helps us keep creating stories like this. Marco took one last look at the screen. He made a decision. "I need to know one thing." Matteo raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Whether Sofia is truly this loyal, or whether she's willing to risk everything." Matteo smiled knowingly. "You want to test her?" Marco nodded. "And tomorrow, the real test begins." Marco barely slept, not because he feared Lorenzo, not because millions of euros were disappearing from his empire. He couldn't stop thinking about Sofia. Every camera feed replayed in his mind, every conversation, every small act of kindness, every moment she had spoken to him believing he could neither see nor stand. For years, people had obeyed Marco because they feared what would happen if they disappointed him. Sofia was different. She expected nothing. That made her impossible to understand. At sunrise, Matteo entered the hidden room carrying a small velvet pouch. "It's ready." Marco looked inside. Stacks of 500 euro notes, nearly 50,000 euros. "You think she'll take it?" Matteo asked. Marco shook his head. "I don't know, and that bothers me." Within minutes, Marco was back in the wheelchair. The dark glasses covered his eyes. The blanket rested over his legs. A few minutes later, Sofia knocked gently. Good morning, Signor Bellini. She pushed the breakfast cart inside. Fresh bread, coffee, fruit. She smiled. I made the bread myself. As she placed the tray beside him, Matteo quietly walked toward the bookshelf. Without Sofia noticing, he slipped the velvet pouch beneath the chair where she would certainly find it while cleaning. Then he quietly left the room. Marco waited. His heartbeat slowed. Sofia hummed softly while dusting the shelves. She swept beneath the wheelchair. Her hand touched something. She bent down. What is this? She picked up the pouch. Her eyes widened. She slowly opened it. Bundles of cash, more money than she had ever held in her life. She immediately looked toward Marco. He remained completely motionless. She looked toward the closed door. Nobody else was inside. She counted one bundle. Another. Another, she whispered to herself. This could pay Mama's hospital bills. Her voice trembled. It could fix the roof. It could clear every debt. Marco listened carefully, every word. His chest tightened. She closed the pouch, walked directly to the bedside table, placed it there. Then she spoke softly. Signor Bellini, I don't know how this got here, but I promise I didn't touch a single euro. I'll tell Signor Matteo, she smiled sadly. My father always said, if money isn't yours, it already belongs to someone else. She turned and left. The door clicked shut. Marco immediately stood. He stared at the untouched pouch. Matteo entered seconds later. Well, Marco looked at him. She never even hesitated. Matteo grinned. Told you. Marco slowly picked up the pouch. Again, Matteo laughed. You've interrogated international smugglers with less determination. I need certainty, so do it again. That afternoon, Marco created a second test. This one was even harder. He removed the priceless gold watch that had belonged to his late father. It wasn't just expensive. It carried memories. He placed it beneath a chair in the hallway. Sofia cleaned every afternoon. Hidden cameras covered every angle. Marco and Matteo watched from the surveillance room. Sofia pushed her cart down the corridor. She suddenly noticed something shining. Oh, she picked it up. Her eyes immediately recognized it. Signor Bellini's watch. She looked around. Nobody, not a soul. She gently cleaned a fingerprint from the glass with the corner of her apron. Then she hurried straight toward Matteo's office. She knocked quickly. Come in, she entered. I found this. Matteo pretended to panic. Oh no, the boss has been looking for that. Sofia smiled with relief. I'm glad I found it. Matteo watched her carefully. You know what it's worth. She nodded. Enough to change someone's life. And yet, she shrugged, it isn't mine. After she left, Matteo couldn't help laughing. I think she's offended you're testing her. Marco stared at the screen. No, she's teaching me. What? Not everyone has a price. Later that evening, another betrayal surfaced. One of Marco's senior bodyguards quietly disabled 3 exterior security cameras. Marco watched him through a backup system the guard didn't even know existed. Minutes later, the same guard met Lorenzo behind the garage. Lorenzo handed him a thick envelope. You know what to do. The guard nodded. It'll be done. When? Tomorrow night. No mistakes. The guard slipped the envelope into his jacket. Marco quietly turned off the monitor. So, the attack begins tomorrow. Matteo folded his arms. We'll be ready. Marco's expression darkened. No, we'll be waiting. The next morning, Sofia noticed Marco looked unusually tense. Of course, she believed his condition was real. She pulled a chair beside him. Can I tell you something? Marco remained still. She smiled. I've never told anyone this. She laughed nervously. When I was younger, I wanted to own a bakery. My nonna made the best bread in our village. I thought we'd open a little shop together. She looked out the window. But life changed. Papa died, Mama became sick. The bakery never happened. Marco listened without moving. I know people laugh at me. They call me names. They think because well, she patted her very round stomach and laughed softly. Because I'm such a big woman that I don't hear them. Her smile faded. But I do. I hear every word. Marco felt an unfamiliar weight in his chest. Sofia continued quietly. They call me fat. They call me ugly. They say no man could ever love someone built like me. She wiped away a tear before it could fall. But Mama always tells me, the right heart will always see what the wrong eyes cannot. She smiled again. So, I keep believing her. Marco lowered his head ever so slightly. Not enough for anyone to notice. Enough for himself. When Sofia finally stood to leave, she gently squeezed his shoulder. I hope someone gives you a second chance too. After she left, Marco remained silent. Matteo entered moments later. You heard everything. Marco nodded. I've judged thousands of people. He looked toward the closed door, and I never noticed. The strongest person in this house. Before Matteo could answer, alarms flashed across the surveillance monitors. One, then another, then another. Matteo rushed toward the screens. What happened? The backup security system had detected movement inside the west perimeter. 3 masked men. They weren't attacking. They were studying the mansion, testing response times. Marco narrowed his eyes. They're scouting. Matteo immediately reached for his phone. I'll send the guards. Marco grabbed his wrist. No, they must believe we're completely unprepared. So we let them go. Marco smiled coldly. We let them think they're invisible. That evening, Lorenzo arrived once more. He entered Marco's bedroom wearing another fake smile. Good evening, Uncle. He pulled a chair closer. You know, I've been thinking. Marco stayed perfectly still. It must be awful. Unable to walk, unable to see. Lorenzo leaned close enough that only Marco could hear. But tomorrow night, you won't have to suffer anymore. He smiled. It'll finally be over. He walked away laughing. The bedroom door closed. Marco slowly clenched the armrest until the wood creaked beneath his tattooed hand. Matteo stepped from the hidden passage. He practically admitted it again. Marco stood from the wheelchair. His face had become terrifyingly calm. Tomorrow night, he looked toward the dark window overlooking the sea. Every snake enters the garden, and tomorrow night they'll all discover. The lion never lost his teeth. If you're enjoying this story, now is the perfect time to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments. Do you think Marco has changed because of Sofia, or is this all still part of his plan? Your support helps us create more cinematic stories like this one. Outside, Sofia finished locking the kitchen doors. She looked up at the stars. Something felt wrong. She couldn't explain it. Her heart wouldn't stop racing. She whispered a quiet prayer. Please, God, keep him safe tonight. She had no idea. The very next night, she would stand face to face with armed killers. And the secret that had been hidden from her since the beginning was finally about to explode into the open. Rain hammered against the Bellini mansion as midnight approached. Sofia couldn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the storm outside, replaying Lorenzo's words in her mind. It'll finally be over. The way he had said it terrified her. Finally, she stood. I have to check on him. She grabbed a sweater and hurried through the quiet hallway. The mansion felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. Then she noticed something that made her blood run cold. 2 security guards were missing from their usual posts. A side door near the west wing was slightly open. Rain blew through the gap. Sofia's heart began pounding. No, 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 no. She hurried toward Marco's bedroom. As she reached the corridor, she heard footsteps behind her. 3 masked men slipped through the shadows carrying silenced weapons. Sofia froze. One of them whispered, "The blind man is in the bedroom, quick and clean." She didn't think, she ran. "Stop!" The gunman turned in surprise. Sofia threw herself against Marco's bedroom door and shoved it open. "Signor Bellini, wake up! They're here!" The attackers charged after her. Sofia slammed the door and pushed a heavy chair against it. Bang! A shoulder hit the other side. Bang! The door shook. Marco sat motionless in the wheelchair, dark glasses hiding his eyes. Sofia rushed to him, trembling. "We have to hide, please." Another violent crash rattled the door. "They're going to kill you." Sofia grabbed the wheelchair handles. "I'm getting you out of here." She struggled to push him toward a hidden balcony door. The chair barely moved. She was breathing hard, panicking. I'm sorry. Please don't die." The attackers hit the door again. Wood splintered. Sofia planted herself in front of Marco, arms spread wide. Tears filled her eyes. "If you want him, you'll have to go through me first." The door exploded inward. 3 masked gunmen stepped inside. One raised his weapon. "Move." Sofia shook her head. "No, last chance." "No!" The gunman aimed at her chest. And then the wheelchair rolled backward. Sofia blinked. Marco Bellini stood up, slowly, calmly, perfectly balanced on his own feet. The room fell silent. Sofia stared in disbelief. The gunman froze. Marco removed his dark glasses. His eyes were cold and clear. "I've seen enough." Before the attackers could react, hidden panels in the walls burst open. Armed Bellini guards flooded the room. "Drop your weapons!" Gunfire erupted. 2 assassins were tackled instantly. The third tried to shoot Marco, but Marco moved with shocking speed, driving him into the wall with a tattooed forearm across his throat. Within seconds, it was over. The attackers lay handcuffed on the floor. Sofia still hadn't moved. She looked from the guards to Marco, then to the wheelchair, then back to Marco. Her voice barely came out. "You can walk." Marco looked at her. "Yes, you can see. Yes." Tears welled in her eyes. "All this time, I know." She stepped back as if she had been struck. "You lied to me." Marco opened his mouth, but another voice interrupted. "Uncle!" Lorenzo stormed into the room with Carlo behind him, pretending to be shocked. "What happened here?" Marco turned slowly. For the first time in weeks, Lorenzo saw his uncle standing. The color drained from his face. Marco smiled. "Surprised?" Lorenzo stumbled backward. You're supposed to be blind." Marco stepped closer. "Paralyzed?" Another step. "Dead?" Lorenzo's breathing became uneven. Marco's voice turned deadly calm. "I heard every conversation. I saw every theft. I watched every betrayal." He pointed at Carlo. "You sold me for money." Carlo dropped to his knees. "Boss, please." "Silence." Marco pointed at Lorenzo. "And you hired assassins to murder your own uncle." Lorenzo panicked. "That's not true." Marco nodded to Matteo, who entered carrying a tablet. Audio recordings began playing through the room. Lorenzo's voice. "You should have died on that road." Then another. "Tomorrow night, you won't have to suffer anymore." Then another. "When they enter this mansion, they're to suffocate him in his sleep." Lorenzo's legs gave out. Marco looked down at him. "You weren't ambitious. You were weak." Police sirens echoed outside the mansion. Lorenzo looked up in horror. "You called the police?" Marco nodded. "I'm retiring." Minutes later, Lorenzo, Carlo, the corrupt guard, and the captured assassins were led away in handcuffs. The mansion finally grew quiet. Only Marco and Sofia remained in the bedroom. She stood near the window, wiping her tears. Marco approached carefully. "Sofia." She didn't turn around. "You let me believe you were helpless." "Yes. I told you things I've never told anyone." "I know." She faced him. "Was I just another test?" The question hit harder than any bullet. Marco answered honestly. "At first, yes." Her expression crumbled. But then everything changed. He took a slow breath. "I spent my life surrounded by people who wanted power, money, or protection. And you were the first person who stayed when there was nothing to gain." Sofia looked down. "I'm just a maid." Marco shook his head. "No, you're the only person in this house who treated me like a human being." Silence filled the room. Then he said something nobody expected. When they pointed a gun at you, you still stood in front of me. Why? Sofia laughed through tears. Because I thought you needed me. Marco's voice softened. I did. A month later, the Bellini mansion hosted a gathering unlike any before. Lawyers, business executives, former allies, and staff filled the grand hall. Sofia stood near the back, uncomfortable in a beautiful dark blue dress that Marco had insisted she wear. She still couldn't believe she was there. Marco stepped onto the stage. For years I built an empire through fear. The room fell silent, and fear made me rich. He looked toward Sofia, but it also made me blind. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Marco continued. The strongest person I met wasn't a captain, a politician, or a businessman. It was a woman everyone overlooked. He called her name Sofia Romano. She froze. Matteo gently nudged her forward. Sofia walked to the stage, cheeks burning. Marco handed her a folder. Inside were property deeds, bank documents, and legal papers. Her eyes widened. I don't understand, Marco smiled. You do now, he addressed the room. Effective immediately, Sofia Romano becomes owner of the Bellini mansion and director of the Bellini Foundation. Gasps filled the hall. Sofia stared at him. Marco, this is too much. He shook his head. No, it's still less than what your loyalty was worth. Tears rolled down her cheeks. For the first time in her life, nobody was looking at her because of her size. Nobody was laughing. Nobody was judging. They were standing and applauding. And for the first time in decades, Marco Bellini felt something he had almost forgotten existed. Peace. If this ending moved you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment "Loyalty still exists" below. Your support helps us keep creating powerful stories like this one. As the applause continued, Marco leaned closer to Sofia. You once told me the right heart sees what the wrong eyes cannot. Sofia smiled through tears. My mother says that. Marco nodded. She was right. The former Mafia boss looked around the hall one last time. The empire built on fear was ending, and the future was beginning with the one person who had stayed when everyone else walked away. If you enjoyed this story, share it with someone who believes kindness still matters. Subscribe for more emotional Mafia stories, and tell us in the comments, would you have forgiven Marco after learning the truth?